Welcome to Dice and Quills, where the art of storytelling meets the roll of the dice. I am Darren Ruckle, professional game master and TTRPG writer, here to share the craft behind world building, adventure design, and running unforgettable games. Whether you're a fellow creator, an aspiring pro, or a lifelong player, you're in the right place. So sharpen your quills, ready your dice, and let's dive into the worlds we imagine. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to Dice and Quills. Today we're talking about something every storyteller and every player loves to hate: villains. The great ones stay with us for years. The bad ones, well, sometimes they barely survive one session before getting steamrolled and forgotten. So how do you design villains that players love to hate? Characters they want to defeat not because they're the bad guy, but because they feel real, important, and personal? That's what we're diving into today. I'll share not just theory, but real lessons from years behind the GM screen, from the unforgettable antagonists who drove entire campaigns to the ones who, well, taught me a lot about what not to do. Whether you're writing your first adventure or your 10th homebrew campaign, this episode will give you tools, examples, and strategies to craft villains your players will talk about long after the final dice are rolled. Let's start with the foundation. Why do villains matter so much in tabletop storytelling? Because villains aren't just obstacles, they're the fuel that drives the story forward. Think about it. A dungeon full of random monsters is fine. It's fun. But a dungeon controlled by an ancient scheming necromancer who personally wronged the party's cleric? Now the players have a reason to care. Villains transform random encounters into narratives. They turn exploration into pursuit and combat into revenge or redemption. Some of the best campaigns I've ever run, and the ones my players still talk about, weren't remembered for the treasure hoards or the spell slots. They're remembered for the villains, the warlord who betrayed them, the sorceress who made them question their loyalty, the ancient dragon who offered them everything they ever wanted for a price. Great villains raise the stakes. They make victory sweeter and failure devastating. They give your players something to fight for and something to fight against. A villain isn't just a big bad enemy. A villain is the narrative engine of your story. Without a good villain, your players might still have fun, but they won't feel the same investment. With a great villain, every session becomes personal. So now that we understand why villains are so critical, how exactly do we build one that's unforgettable? Let's break down the anatomy of a great villain piece by piece. Building a memorable villain isn't about making them stronger, scarier, or louder. It's about making them real. Let's break this down into 5 key elements that truly unforgettable villains almost always share. First, your villain needs a clear goal. Not destroy the world because they're evil. That's shallow. Real villains believe they're doing the right thing, at least from their point of view. Maybe they want to conquer the kingdom because they believe only they can save it from corruption. Maybe they're hoarding forbidden magic because they believe knowledge in mortal hands lead to disaster. A villain without a goal is just an obstacle. A villain with a goal is a character. Second, your villain needs flaws, and not cartoon flaws like they're just greedy or they love chaos. Give them something human. Pride, fear, guilt. Something that if you twisted the circumstances just a little, your players might even sympathize with them. One of the best compliments I ever heard after a campaign was a player saying, "I hated what she did, but I totally understand why she did it." That's powerful. That's unforgettable. Third, find a way to connect your villain personally to the players. It could be direct, like the villain wronged them. The villain used to be one of them. The villain threatens something they love. Or it could be indirect. The villain embodies everything the hero fears. The villain represents the road not taken, who the hero could have become. The closer the emotional connection, the stronger the player's reactions will be. Fourth, a villain needs presence. That doesn't mean they show up in every session, but it does mean their impact should be felt even when they're off-screen. When players enter a village abandoned because of the villain's army, when they hear rumors of the villain's latest decree, when they see the scars left behind by the villain's ambitions. The villain becomes real through the world, not just through dialogue or monologues. Finally, the best villains could, in theory, be redeemed. Or at least you could imagine that they could have been once. Even if your players never choose to try. Even if the villain is too far gone now. That tiny possibility, that sliver of humanity, makes the villain's downfall tragic. And tragedy leaves a deeper mark than simple victory. So let's recap. Villains need to have clear goals and motivations, relatable flaws, personal connection to the players, presence and impact, and the possibility of redemption or tragedy. Villains built with these pieces aren't just obstacles. They're engines of drama, conflict, and meaning. Now that we've built the blueprint for unforgettable villains, let's talk about some real examples and a few lessons I learned the hard way behind the GM screen. Because trust me, not every villain I created was a masterpiece. Let's talk about what went right and what went wrong. Let's pull back the curtain a little, because while it's easy to talk about theory, it's the real-world examples, the stories from behind the screen, that make these lessons stick. One of the most effective villains I ever introduced started life as a hero. His name was Commander Halvain, a decorated general who had saved the kingdom in a brutal war 20 years before the campaign began. When the players first heard his name, it was in statues and songs. He was a legend. But as the campaign unfolded, they began to realize something wasn't right. Halvain hadn't vanished into quiet retirement. He had been quietly building a paramilitary force, convinced that the current rulers were corrupt and weak. To him, overthrowing the monarchy wasn't treason, it was salvation. What made Halvain unforgettable wasn't just his armies or strategies. It was that deep down he believed he was saving the kingdom, again. And worse, the players couldn't entirely prove him wrong. Now, not every villain I created was a success. Enter Zornax the Doom Mage. He had a floating fortress, he had legions of undead, he had a booming evil laugh, and an unpronounceable artifact of ultimate destruction. And he lasted exactly 2 sessions. The players never bought into him. He felt flat, cartoonish, more like a parody of a villain than a real character. They called him Captain Edge. And when they finally confronted him, it wasn't a tense emotional climax, it was a speed run. And honestly, it was my fault. Zornax had no humanity, no flaw they could understand, no motivation behind be evil because evil is cool. He was a cardboard cutout with a skull crown. Players are smart. They can tell when a villain is real, and when a villain is just a pile of tropes stitched together. Halvain worked because he was human. Zornax failed because he was hollow. Villains need depth. They need motivations, flaws, and emotional impact, just like heroes. With those lessons in mind, let's talk about something just as important as building your villain. Let's talk about the common mistakes that destroy good villain ideas before they ever make it to the table. Here are 5 common mistakes I've seen and made when designing villains. Number 1, making them evil for evil's sake. He's just evil because he's evil is the fastest way to kill player interest. Even the darkest villain should believe they are right, at least in their own mind. Number 2, overpowering them too early. If the villain crushes the players repeatedly with no hope of winning or changing things, players stop caring. Villains should challenge players, not make them feel powerless. Number 3, making them too distant. If the players only ever hear rumors about the villain, but never see their impact directly, the villain feels abstract, not real. Number 4, ignoring player actions. Villains should respond to what players do. If the players foil the villain's plans, the villain should notice and react. Static villains are forgettable villains. Number 5, not giving them humanity. Every monster can have dreams, fears, regrets. If you give your villain even a flicker of humanity, you'll create tension players won't soon forget. So remember, give them real motivations. Let players challenge them meaningfully. Make their presence felt. Let villains react to player actions. Never forget their humanity. Avoid these mistakes, and you'll already be building villains stronger than most. All right, we've built our villain. We've seen what works and what doesn't. Now let's wrap up with a few final thoughts and a glimpse into next episode's adventure. At the heart of every great campaign, every great story, is a conflict worth caring about. And at the heart of the conflict is almost always a villain. Villains aren't just there to make players swing swords harder or cast bigger spells. They're there to matter. They remind players what's at stake. They test their beliefs, their loyalty, their creativity. If you craft your villains with humanity, motivation, and presence, you won't just be creating an antagonist. You'll be creating a character your players will remember, love, hate, and sometimes both at once for years to come. That's how legends are made. That's how you leave a mark. Next time on Dice and Quills, we'll be taking over storytelling craft even further. We'll dive into the art of world building, how to create living, breathing worlds from scratch, how to avoid common pitfalls that make settings feel hollow, and how to build places players actually want to explore. Whether you're designing your first homebrew world or refining a setting you've used for years, this next episode will give you practical tips, ideas, and inspiration to bring your world to life. I can't wait to explore it with you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I'd love if you subscribed to Dice and Quills and maybe left a review on your favorite podcast app. Every subscription, every review helps more storytellers, players, and dreamers find their way to this community. You can also support the show directly, helping me keep the dice rolling and the quills scratching through the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening, for creating, and for imagining. Sharpen your quills, ready your dice. I'll see you next time.